The Hawk, the Hound, and the Butterfly. Chapter 9. Artemis. Artemis hugged her arms tight around her chest as she stared at the wall of her cell. The colour of the stone faded to dark grey. She was annoyed at how easily she'd cowered in the presence of that lunatic, how weak and broken she'd looked. He knew he scared her. The way he spoke, and the way he stared at her, sent shivers down her spine just thinking about it. Her father had always tried to keep her away from the death and violence of war. Instead, he'd made her concentrate on her studies. But no teacher had ever taught her how to escape a madman. No book had ever given her the knowledge to free herself from a damp, dark prison cell. If she was strong, like Athena, she could break through the bars and overpower the guards. She'd leave a trail of bodies in her wake and be home in time for supper. Or, if she was as persuasive as Ares, she'd have the guards eating out of her hands. They would be in these cells, not her. Even if she were half as brave as Apollo was, she never would have been in this mess in the first place. She wouldn't have run like a frightened little mouse from those orbs. She would have stayed and fought side by side with Apollo. But Artemis had none of those abilities. Nothing had prepared her for this. A cough came from the guard's room across from Artemis's cell. She turned and saw the whelp sitting in a chair, his feet propped up on another, in front of the fireplace. He was supposed to be guarding her, watching her, but he was asleep. The orange colour of the flames in the fireplace were dull compared to the shade he had in his hair. It fell in loose corkscrew-shaped curls around his face and down his shoulders. His eyelashes were long and as light as his skin, which was probably pale from spending so much time down in the dungeon. Artemis looked at her hands. They were already chalky white. She wondered if being in this cell for too long would send her skin translucent. Artemis turned over onto her back. She shivered, the heat from the fireplace not strong enough to reach the inside of her cell. If only she still had the sheets she'd used to make the rope. But the Creator made sure any bit of warmth she would have gotten from them was taken away. Artemis wriggled, trying to find some sort of comfort, but the mattress was so thin that she could feel the bars beneath it slicing into her back. Her hair was strewn out like a spider's web, tangled and matted with so many knots that it would have been easier to chop it all off than attempt to untangle it. She still wore the same clothes she'd put on that morning, only now they were covered in a thick layer of dirt and sweat and whatever else they'd acquired from the air in this cell. She'd never be able to fall asleep feeling like an old used-up dish rag. If she were home right now, she'd be sitting in a tub of warm water with rose petals sprinkled over it. The candles would be scented with cedarwood, a bowl of juicy grapes would sit beside her, and she wouldn't be so afraid. Artemis sighed and rolled onto her side. She closed her eyes and imagined she was home. The walls of her bedroom appeared around her. The room was drenched in sunlight, and a crisp breeze blew in through the windows. The long white curtains around them danced across the room. Her bed sat in the middle against the back wall. The posts on each corner of the bed were carved to look like intertwining tree branches that grew upwards and stretched over the bed, creating a canopy covered with pink, white, and yellow flowers. The mattress was thick and springy. The pillows were soft and feathery. Artemis could almost feel the soft linen sheets brush against her legs. It really felt like she was home. But if she really was home... Artemis reached up and touched her hand against the stone cell wall, but with her eyes closed, it was warm from the sun, and on the other side would be Apollo. When Apollo was on a break from training at the academy, he would stay in his old bedroom, the one on the other side of her wall. If she'd had a bad dream during the night, Artemis would tap on the wall in a rhythmic pattern that imitated a horse galloping. Apollo would always tap back. It let her know she was safe and that nothing could hurt her, because he was right there on the other side of that wall. Artemis tapped her knuckles against the cold stone wall. She waited, but there was no reply. Her hand fell back down on the bed. At least thinking about home made Artemis feel warmer. She pulled the sheets and woolen blanket up to her neck. They felt different to last night. They usually weren't so itchy. Artemis opened her eyes. She found a tattered grey blanket laid over her. A pitter-patter noise ran alongside her bed. Artemis sat up with a jolt, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. A stick-like figure froze in the shadows. Artemis glanced over at the whelp. His guarding duties had become too much, and he was softly snoring. "Jicklick?" Artemis whispered into the darkness. The stick-like figure turned around. The faint light glinted off a toothy grin. "Hi," said Jicklick. Artemis narrowed her eyes in on him and leaned forward. He looked so skinny without his other half attached to him. Artemis shook her head and realized her mouth was hanging open. Thanks," she said, holding up the blanket. "Hey, how did you—" "Oh, please, please, please!" Jicklick scampered over to Artemis and fell to his knees at Artemis's feet. "Please, please, please do not tell. Jicklick saw that you were cold and he has sister to keep him warm and sister has her to keep him warm. Jicklick, it's okay, stand up." Artemis patted Jicklick on the shoulder. "Oh, thank you, princess." Jicklick covered his hands over his mouth. Artemis's heartbeat grew faster. "What did you call me?" "Nothing. Jicklick did not mean to." "Jicklick," Artemis spoke in a whisper, "do you know who I really am?" Jicklick puffed out his lower lip and nodded. "Not too many golden-haired Artemises in the world." Artemis frowned and bit her lip. Jicklick stepped up beside her and patted her knee. "Jicklick would never tell." "I know, thank you." Artemis smiled. Her shoulders relaxed. "I didn't know you two could, well, separate." "You are not the only one." Jicklick looked over his shoulder. Madge was curled up into a ball, asleep on the bed in the other cell. "You mean Madge doesn't know?" Jicklick looked down at the ground and kicked his feet at the dust. He shook his head. "She cannot do what I can do." "You mean she can't separate from you?" Jicklick nodded. "But if you can separate from her, then why do you always stay attached?" Artemis was amazed to even see two trowels, but this was almost magical. "Because she is my sister." Jicklick looked up at Artemis as if the answer was obvious. "And I would miss her." It was obvious. "I guess I know what you mean." Sure, Artemis and Apollo had disagreed sometimes, but they always sorted things out and were laughing about how silly it was a couple hours later. If she could, Artemis would gladly spend her days with Apollo. "Please do not tell her," said Jicklick. "I won't tell your secret if you won't tell mine," Artemis said. Jicklick touched his hand to his heart. "Jicklick promises." Artemis smiled. An idea popped into her head. "Perhaps we could make use of your gift." Artemis looked over at the whelp. His head was tilted to one side, a stream of drool pouring down onto his chest. "Jicklick likes being useful." Jicklick clapped his hands. Madge grumbled. "You should go get some rest," Artemis said. "We all should." Jicklick nodded. He scampered back through the bars and nuzzled into Madge's side. Artemis laid back down on her bed. Now she had a reason to sleep.